Traditionally, the fourth Sunday of Easter is known as Good Shepherd Sunday. Reflecting on the image of the Good Shepherd and the sheepfold, we are to consider Easter resurrection by taking a serious look at how we choose to live as individuals and as a community. Are we living death or living life? In the Kids Corner, I mentioned the gems that I have found between the pages of books, particularly old books. Bookmarks, notes, prayer cards, newspaper clippings, pressed flowers. Amongst some old books of my dad's, I found a little booklet published 120 years ago called The Song of the Syrian Guest. The author, William Allen Knight, tells a story of his family in America receiving a Syrian guest into their home for dinner and conversation. The guest told many stories from Syria, including the words of a favorite song which we know as Psalm 23, along with an explanation of each line from the heart of a Syrian shepherd. Two sections particularly spoke to me as good news, as words of resurrection. Amidst new restrictions and growing cases of COVID, I invite you to pull up a chair and listen to two phrases from Psalm 23 as told by a Syrian guest. Thou art with me. To show how much the presence of the shepherd counts for the welfare of the sheep, I can think of nothing better than the strange thing I now tell you. It is quite beyond the usual daily care on which the flock depends so fondly, but I've seen it more than once. Sometimes, in spite of all the care of a shepherd and his dogs, a wolf will get mixed into the flock. The sheep are wild with fright. They run and leap and make it impossible to get at the foe in their midst, who at that very moment might be fastening their fangs on the throat of the helpless member of the flock. But the shepherd is with them. He knows what to do, even at such a time. He leaps to a rock or a hillock so that he might be seen and heard. Then his voice, in a long call, says something like a wolf's cry, "Ooh! Ooh!" On hearing this, the sheep remember the shepherd. They heed his voice, and strange to tell, the poor timid creatures, which were helpless with terror before, instantly rush with all of their strength into a solid mass. The pressure is irresistible. The wolf is overcome. Frequently, he is crushed to death, while the shepherd stands there on the rock and continues to cry, "Ooh! Ooh!" I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. You anoint my head with oil. Oh, there begins the beautiful pictures at the end of the day. The psalm has sung of the whole round of the day's wandering, all the needs of the sheep, all the care of the shepherd. Now it closes with the last scene of the day. At the door of the sheepfold, the shepherd stands, and the rotting of the sheep takes place. The shepherd turns his body to let the sheep pass. He is the door, as Christ says of himself. With his rod, he holds back the sheep while he looks over one by one as they go into the fold. He has his horn filled with olive oil, and he has cedar tar, and he anoints a knee that is bruised on the rocks or a side scratched by thorns. And here comes one that is not bruised, but is simply worn and exhausted. He bathes its face and head with the refreshing olive oil, and he takes the large two-handed cup and dips it brimming full from the water he has brought for that purpose, and lets the weary sheep drink. There's nothing finer in the psalm than this. God's care is not for the wounded only. It is for those who are just worn and weary. Thou anointest my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. Are we living death or living life? What I hear in the story told by the Syrian guest is that the heart of shepherding and being a sheepfold is relationship. Thou art with me. You anoint my head with oil. Both are relational. When reminded by the shepherd to not be afraid, the sheep work together, collectively pushing in on each other to form a tightly knit community so that they can face, address, tackle whatever wolf is in their midst. There are instances where collectively we hear God's call and do push in on each other to form a tightly knit community that addresses social ills and evil in our midst. But there are other examples where we are scattered and not a sheepfold at all. When it comes to the stewardship of creation, reconciliation with indigenous peoples, addressing systemic racism, we're not in the sheepfold. We're not even in the same field. There are other areas also where perhaps we are living dead rather than living life. Areas where we are not living as a sheepfold, meaning our relationships are all screwed up. Consider how the norm is no longer tight-knit neighborhoods or extended family living. We have hired hands and outsourced our relationships. Consider that much of our caring capacity has been given to experts, professionals, service providers, organizations, government, particularly in relationship with seniors and long-term care, childcare, healthcare, education, food production, manufacturing the things we use. On so many levels, we are disconnected. We are outsourcing relationship. Are we living death or living life? The Syrian guest's reflection on Psalm 23 is the shepherd standing on rock or hillock and crying, "Ooh, ooh." This is a call of resurrection, a call to not be afraid, a call to remind us to work together to stamp out evil in our midst, to push in on each other and form a tight community and address the things that draw us away from relationship with shepherd, sheep, and creation. Living death is living that does not have us living into our capacity to care. It is living devoid of relationship or only living into some relationships. It is outsourcing and hiring others to do the difficult work of walking with others, suffering with others, taking care of others. It is being too busy to care or too wrapped up in our own stuff to warrant getting involved. Living life is living that is resurrection, life that brings joy because all our relationships, those with God, people, creation, and objects, center on care and growing and or reflecting on the relationship. Living life is taking to heart the care of the shepherd and applying the words, "Thou art with me, and you anoint my head with oil," and then sharing this resurrection in and through our relationships. As a gathered community, anointed with oil and cup overflowing, be released from fear and refreshed from weariness, that you may live life. Amen.